The phone rang just as I lifted my teacup. Chamomile. No sugar. The kind of quiet I had learned to protect. Your crazy mother won't let us inside. A woman's voice screamed through the speaker. We're on the stairs with the kids and the suitcases. I didn't need her to say her name. I knew that voice. Sharp. Urgent. Accusing. Jessica. I stayed where I was. I didn't rush to the door. I didn't even stand. Outside my apartment, chaos echoed through the walls, dragging luggage, children crying, footsteps pacing, voices rising and falling. They had been there for almost 2 hours now. 2 full hours of knocking. Complaining. Making sure the entire building knew exactly who they wanted blamed. And yet, what hurt most wasn't the noise. It was knowing my son believed her. Robert had left work in a panic after her call, convinced his mother had lost her mind. I watched from behind the curtain as he arrived, tie crooked, sweat on his forehead, jamming his old key into my lock again and again. Of course it didn't work. It wasn't broken. It was intentional. I had changed the locks 3 weeks earlier. I had warned them. But this night didn't begin with suitcases on the stairs. It began years ago, back when I believed love meant endurance. My name is Margaret. I'm 71 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that being useful meant being valued. When Robert married Jessica, I welcomed her warmly. I wanted to believe her smiles. I wanted to believe her kindness was real. I lent them money when they bought their first home, $5,000 saved over decades of careful living. They promised to repay it. They never did. Then came the grandchildren. 4 of them. Beautiful, loud, exhausting, wonderful. I rearranged my life around their needs without question. Babysitting whenever asked. Buying clothes, school supplies, birthday gifts. Keeping my refrigerator full for visits, even when that meant I lived simply afterward. I told myself this was family. I told myself this was love. Standing in my quiet living room that night, listening to my son plead through the door, a painful clarity settled in. They hadn't come to visit me. They had come to take over my home, because they thought 71 meant powerless. They thought age meant I would step aside quietly. That I wouldn't argue. That I wouldn't protect myself. For the first time in my life, they were wrong. What they didn't know, what none of them expected, was why I changed the locks. And what they once tried to make me sign when I was sick, exhausted, and still trusting. 5 weeks before the night they stood on the stairs, I was lying in a hospital bed staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize. Gallbladder surgery, the doctor called it. Routine. But at 71, routine still leaves you fragile. I was sent home with strict instructions, 6 weeks of rest, no stress, no lifting, no surprises. I told my son and his wife everything. They sounded understanding. Reassuring, even. Robert told me there was no rush. Jessica's voice softened in that careful way she used when she wanted to sound kind. They would wait. My health came first. I believed them. Recovery was slower than I expected. I slept propped up on pillows, afraid to turn too quickly because of the stitches. Walking from the bedroom to the kitchen felt like crossing small battlefield. My neighbor, Eleanor, brought soup and helped me with groceries. My family didn't come once. Then, one afternoon, the door opened. Not a knock. Not a call ahead. The door simply opened. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard footsteps. Jessica walked in first, her heels clicking confidently against my floor. Robert followed, holding his phone, already scanning the room. They didn't look at me. They didn't ask how I felt. They looked around. They came to inspect. Jessica opened closets. Pulled drawers. Commented on space. Robert measured corners with his phone and murmured about where beds could fit. I pushed myself upright in bed, pain flaring, and asked what they were doing. "Oh, don't worry, Mom," Robert said quickly. "We're just planning ahead." Planning what? That's when Jessica explained, casually, that they decided the children would stay with me while they were away for work. 3 months. 4 children. My 1-bedroom apartment. She spoke as if the decision had already been made. I reminded them about my surgery. About the doctor's warning. About how I could barely stand long enough to make tea. She smiled. "You won't have to do much. They're older now. You'll just be here." Then the suggestions began. My sofa was too delicate. My dining table unsafe. My bedroom more practical for them. She talked about moving my furniture into storage. About bringing her own things. Robert didn't stop her. He nodded along, as if this conversation had already happened somewhere without me. Finally, she said it plainly. I would sleep in the living room. On an inflatable mattress. At 71. 5 weeks after surgery. As if my comfort were optional. As if my home already belonged to them. Then Robert pulled papers from his bag. Just something we need you to sign, he said. So we can make decisions while we're here. I didn't sign. That night, after they left, I cried, not from pain, but from clarity. They weren't asking anymore. They were assuming. But what truly terrified me wasn't what they demanded that day, it was what I discovered soon after. And how close I came to losing my home while I was still recovering. After they left that afternoon, my apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had moved, but because something inside me had. I lay awake that night listening to the small sounds I usually found comforting, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall. Jessica's voice kept replaying in my head. You'll just be heredity sounded harmless when she said it. Almost kind. But the more I heard it, the more it felt like a decision made without meant. The next few days passed slowly. Recovery does that, stretches time until every hour feels deliberate. Eleanor came by each evening, sometimes with soup, sometimes just to sit quietly. One night, she didn't leave right away. She folded her hands in her lap and said gently, Margaret, I need to tell you something. Her sister worked at the same company as Robert. There's no project, she said. No assignment out of town. Nothing temporary. I laughed weakly at first. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative felt too heavy to accept all at once. Surely there was an explanation. A misunderstanding. But once the doubt settled in, it didn't leave. That night, when sleep refused to come, I decided to look, not to accuse, just to understand. It didn't take long. Passing comment from another neighbor. A familiar photo in an online listing. A kitchen I recognized instantly. Their house. My son's house. Listed as a furnished short-term rental. Available immediately. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with each detail. It wasn't a work trip. It was a business arrangement. They were renting out their home for extra income, and they had already decided where their children would go. To menu hotel costs. No childcare expenses. No disruption to their plan. Just my quiet apartment, my recovery, my time, absorbed without discussion. Everything suddenly aligned. The urgency. The inspection. The papers Robert wanted me to sign. They hadn't wanted permission. They wanted certainty. What frightened me most wasn't the money, it was how natural this all seemed to them. As if years of generosity had trained me to say yes without thinking. As if my age meant resistance wouldn't even occur to me. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final step in a pattern. I sat alone that night, my body still weak, my home quiet, and felt something unfamiliar settle in. Resolve. The next morning, I called a locksmith. I changed the locks. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because I finally understood something essential. If I didn't protect my space now, I might lose it, quietly, legally, and permanently. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly they would respond when they realized I meant it. Or how my silent decision would turn into a confrontation the entire building would witness. They arrived just as the sky began to darken. I knew before the knocking started. My phone vibrated once on the table beside me, then went quiet. A moment later, I heard the unmistakable scrape of wheels against concrete. Suitcases. I stayed seated for a few seconds, letting the sound settle. Children's footsteps. A tired whimper. Jessica's voice, tight, irritated, already sharpened for confrontation. The first knock came quickly. Firm. Expectant. I didn't move. The second knock was louder. Then the handle rattled as Robert tried his old key, turning it again and again, as if insistence alone could undo a decision already made. I rose slowly and crossed the room, stopping just short of the door. From the window beside it, I pulled the curtain back a fraction. They were all there. Jessica stood with her arms folded, chin lifted, her expression set in practiced outrage. Robert paced the narrow landing, rubbing his face, glancing from the door to the children. 4 small suitcases sat open on the steps. The children leaned against the wall, exhausted, confused, clinging to one another. They had traveled all day. And they had come anyway. "Mom," Robert called, his voice low, careful. "Please open the door. We just need to talk. The kids are worn out." My chest tightened, not with doubt, but with clarity. This was the moment they had counted on. The moment fatigue and guilt were meant to soften me. Jessica lifted her voice, sharp enough to carry. "This is unbelievable. Leaving your grandchildren outside like this? What kind of person does that?" Lights flicked on along the stairwell. A door opened above them. Someone leaned over the railing. Another neighbor stepped into the hallway, no longer pretending not to notice. The problem was no longer private. I opened the window fully and spoke calmly, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I told you 3 weeks ago that I couldn't receive you yet." Jessica looked up, incredulous. "That was before. Things change." "Yes," I replied. "And when they do, you ask." Robert stepped closer to the door. "Mom, please. If you're upset, we can talk inside. Just let us in." I shook my head slowly. If I let you in, nothing would change. That familiar pattern was there, urgency dressed up as reassurance. The promise that everything would be reasonable once the door opened. It never was. "You're overreacting," Jessica snapped. Overreacting because I had surgery. Overreacting because I said no. Overreacting because I refused to disappear quietly. Then her patience broke. "We already gave up our house," she said loudly. "What did you expect us to do?" The stairwell went still. "Not asked. Not arranged. Already done." The neighbors exchanged glances. No one spoke, but no one looked away. Robert stopped pacing. He turned to her slowly, as if hearing her clearly for the first time. "You already did what?" he asked. I looked down at my son standing there, between his wife and my closed door, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not guilt. Resolve. What Jessica said next, careless, public, and impossible to take back, would expose exactly how she saw me. And force my son to choose whether he could keep looking away. Robert didn't answer her right away. He stood very still, staring at Jessica as if he were trying to understand how they had arrived at this moment without him noticing sooner. The children sat quietly now, watching the adults with the wary awareness only tired kids have when something is wrong but no one explains it. "What do you mean?" he said finally. "You already gave up the house." Jessica exhaled loudly, irritated. "We rented it. For 3 months. I told you. You told me you were considering it," he said. She waved a hand dismissively. "Same thing. The deal was good." The stairwell felt tighter. Someone shifted behind them. A neighbor cleared their throat but said nothing. "And the kids?" Robert asked, his voice lower now. Jessica shrugged. "They're here." That was the plan. "The plan?" he repeated. "Yes," she snapped. "They have a grandmother." There it was. Not said with cruelty. Said with certainty. As if it were obvious. As if it were a rule everyone but me understood. Something moved across Robert's face, confusion giving way to recognition. He looked up toward my window, then back at his wife. "You didn't ask her," he said. Jessica's patience finally cracked. "Why would I? She's always said yes. Always." The word echoed louder than her voice. I spoke then, not raising my tone, not stepping into anger. I said yes because I thought it was love. Jessica scoffed. "And now you're punishing us?" "No," I replied evenly. "I'm protecting myself." Robert swallowed. "You planned this before you even spoke to her." "We needed a solution," she shot back. "At her expense," he said quietly. Jessica's voice hardened. "She's 71, Robert. She sits alone all day. This gives her something to do." "Purpose." The word dropped into the stairwell like a weight. A neighbor whispered, "That's terrible." Robert took a step back from her, as if the space between them suddenly mattered. "My mother just had surgery," he said slowly. "And you wanted her sleeping on an inflatable mattress." "That was temporary," Jessica snapped. "Stop exaggerating." He shook his head. "What's exaggerated is showing up unannounced and assuming she'll give up her home." Jessica stared at him, disbelief flashing across her face. You're choosing her over your own family? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I'm choosing to stop pretending this is normal. For the first time, Jessica looked uncertain. I rested my hand against the window frame, steady. This ends here, I said calmly. You will not enter my home tonight. Robert nodded once. The decision had been made, but Jessica wasn't finished, and what she threatened next would pull strangers fully into the conflict and turn this family dispute into something far more serious. Jessica's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. The uncertainty vanished, replaced by something colder. Calculated. So that's it, she said. You're really going to do this? No one answered her. She looked around the stairwell, the neighbors watching, the children sitting silently, Robert standing a step away from her now instead of beside her. The audience had shifted, and she felt itchy, her voice sharpened. You do realize this looks terrible, don't you? An old woman refusing to let her grandchildren inside. People could misunderstand. I felt Eleanor move closer beneath my window. I hadn't seen her arrive, but she was there now, arms folded, eyes steady. Nothing is being misunderstood, she said firmly. You were told she couldn't receive you. Jessica ignored her. She looked up at me. If you don't open that door, Margaret, I'll call the police. The word landed heavily. Police. A murmur rippled through the neighbors. Robert turned sharply toward her. Jessica, stop. She's endangering the children, Jessica continued, louder now. Leaving them outside. That's neglect. My heart thudded, not with fear, but disbelief. I spoke carefully. You brought them here without permission. That doesn't matter, Jessica snapped. You're their grandmother. You're obligated. Obligated. The word felt heavier than the lock on my door. Eleanor stepped forward. No one is obligated to surrender their home, she said. Especially not someone recovering from surgery. Another neighbor nodded. She warned you, someone else added. Jessica's mouth tightened. She pulled out her phone. Fine. Let the authorities decide. Robert grabbed her wrist. You are not calling the police on my mother. She forced this, Jessica said. If they see how unstable she's acting, changing locks, refusing to help family, unstable. That was the word that chilled me. Not because it was true, but because I understood where she was going. I leaned forward, my voice clear. You will not use my age or my recovery as weapons. Jessica laughed sharply. Then open the door. No. The single word echoed more than any shouting could have. Eleanor turned to Robert. You need to get your children somewhere safe. This isn't helping them. He looked at the kids, then back at his wife. His shoulders slumped. You're scaring them, he said quietly. For a moment, Jessica looked around again, at the neighbors, at Robert, at the children. The control she expected wasn't there anymore. Her phone lowered. But the damage was already done. Because once threats replace conversation, nothing goes back to normal. What happened next didn't involve the police, but it did involve someone unexpected stepping forward and saying something that finally ended this standoff. For a moment, no one moved. The stairwell felt suspended between outcomes, like a breath held too long. Jessica's phone rested loosely in her hand now, no longer raised, no longer threatening, just there, a reminder of how far she'd already gone. That's when a new voice entered the space. Enough. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it carried. We all turned toward the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs, measured, purposeful. A woman in her early 40s stopped beside the group, one hand still gripping the railing. Sarah. Jessica's younger sister. She took in the scene in seconds, the children sitting on the steps, the suitcases, the neighbors watching, Robert's exhausted posture, Jessica's tight expression. Then she looked up at my window. Mrs. Margaret, she said calmly, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Jessica spun toward her. What are you doing here? I got a call, Sarah replied. From Robert. He sounded desperate. Jessica scoffed. This is a family matter. Sarah nodded. It is. That's why I'm stepping in. She crouched in front of the children first, checking their faces, brushing hair from tired eyes. How long have you been sitting here? 2 hours, Sophia said quietly. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. When she stood, her voice was different, controlled, but sharp. You brought 4 children here without confirming anything, she said to her sister. And when it didn't work, you turned it into a spectacle. Jessica bristled. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Sarah replied. You rented your house. You needed free childcare. You assumed she'd say yes. That's not fair, Jessica snapped. It's accurate, Sarah said. The neighbors murmured softly. No one contradicted her. Sarah turned to Robert. Why are the kids still here? He hesitated. Because. I didn't know where else to take them. She nodded once. You do now. Jessica's eyes widened. No. They're not going to your place. They are, Sarah said firmly. Tonight. Jessica shook her head. You can't just take them. I can, Sarah replied. Because I'm offering help, not demanding it. She looked up at me again. You've done nothing wrong. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. Something loosened in my chest. Sarah turned back to the children. Grab your things. You're coming with me. We'll get dinner, baths, and real beds. The children didn't hesitate. Robert exhaled slowly, like someone released from underwater. Thank you, he said. Jessica stood frozen as the plan unraveled around her. You're all against me now, she said bitterly. No, Sarah replied. We're against what you did. Suitcases were lifted. Neighbors stepped back, giving space. Eleanor squeezed my hand through the open window. The standoff was over. But the consequences were just beginning. That night didn't end with shouting or police lights, but it did end with a decision my son would make next. One that would change his marriage forever. When the stairwell finally emptied, the silence didn't feel peaceful. Not yet. It felt deliberate, like a room after an argument where nothing is broken, but everything has shifted. I stood by the window and watched Sarah's car disappear down the street. The children were buckled in now, their heads already leaning against the glass. Robert stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped as if the weight of the evening had finally settled on him. Jessica didn't look back. When the last echo of footsteps faded, I realized my hands were trembling. Eleanor appeared beside me without announcement. She must have come up the stairs quietly, the way she always did. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, grounding the room by her presence alone. Then she knocked softly on my door. Margaret, she said. It's just me. For the first time that night, I unlocked it. When the door opened, something in my chest loosened. Eleanor stepped inside and wrapped her arms around me, firm and steady. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until that moment. You did the right thing, she said. Not as reassurance, as fact. We sat in my living room still intact. My furniture untouched. My space unclaimed. I poured fresh tea, noticing that my hands finally felt my own again. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Robert. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have protected you. I didn't. But I see it now. I read it twice before answering. Seeing it is only the beginning, I typed. What matters is what you do next. His reply came quickly. I know. I won't let this happen again. I didn't respond right away. Promises didn't frighten me anymore, but they no longer comforted me either. That night, sleep came easily. Not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was being demanded of me. Next morning, the building felt different. Neighbors greeted me with a kind of quiet respect that hadn't been there before. No pity. No curiosity disguised as concern. Mrs. Collins from the third floor paused beside the mailboxes. My mother never learned to say no, she said gently. I wish she had. So did I, once. Later that afternoon, Robert came alone. No Jessica. No children. We met at the cafe on the corner, neutral ground. He looked smaller somehow, not weaker, just stripped of certainty. I thought keeping the peace meant agreeing, he said quietly. I didn't see that all I was doing was letting you carry the cost. Yes, I said. You were. He nodded. He didn't argue. That mattered. I'm staying with Sarah for now, he added. Jessica says I betrayed her. I took a sip of tea. Setting boundaries often looks like betrayal to people who benefit from having none. He flinched slightly, not from the words, but from the truth in them. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. I do, I replied calmly. Whatever happens won't be at the expense of my dignity. He looked at me then, really looked. This time, without excuses. 3 months later, the consequences of that night would finally settle, not through another confrontation, but through the quiet rebuilding of everything that followed. 3 months passed without another confrontation. No raised voices. No threats. No sudden arrivals. Life didn't return to what it had been, it rearranged itself. Robert kept his word. He moved into a small apartment near Sarah's place and began rebuilding his days around responsibility instead of avoidance. We met once a week at the same cafe, always at the same table by the window. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Silence, I learned, can be respectful when it isn't used as punishment. Jessica never came with him. At first, that absence ached more than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because it confirmed something I had resisted for years. She hadn't lost access to my home that night. She had lost control. The children came slowly, carefully, like guests relearning the rules of a house. Short visits. Clear times. No assumptions. They adjusted faster than the adults. Sophia, the oldest, asked me once, "Grandma, are you allowed to say no now?" I smiled gently. I always was. I just forgot. She nodded, absorbing it like truth instead of tragedy. That mattered more than any apology. The building felt different now. Not quieter, just steadier. Neighbors lingered to talk. Eleanor and I shared afternoon tea like a ritual instead of a recovery exercise. My apartment felt like mine again, not because it was defended, but because it was respected. One afternoon, Robert finally said what had been sitting between us. "I don't know if my marriage will survive this," he admitted. "But I know I can't unsee what I saw." I looked at him carefully. "Clarity is expensive," I said. "But confusion costs more in the long run." He nodded. He was learning to sit with consequences instead of outsourcing them. As for me, something unexpected happened. My body healed. Slowly. My strength returned. But more importantly, my sense of self did. I stopped apologizing for my limits. I stopped explaining my no. I stopped confusing love with sacrifice. One evening, as sunlight filled my living room, I sat on my sofa, and realized something quietly profound. Nothing had been taken from me. Something had been returned. Time. Peace. Authority over my own life. I am 71 years old. I am a grandmother. A neighbor. A woman who learned, late but fully, that kindness without boundaries invites erosion, but kindness with boundaries builds respect. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this: saying no didn't break my family. It revealed who was willing to grow and who wasn't. And for the first time in years, that knowledge didn't frighten me. It set me free.